Hospital Porter's pride and dignity stop the New World Order. Welcome to Herpanwo TV and welcome to this, another reply video to Stefan Molyneux. Yes, it's once again, he's done it. I've been inspired to put photons onto celluloid by Mr. Molyneux debate so quick, two tracks melt into one. That's right, we're having big fun. So kick back, relax while we do to your eardrum. Let me hear say, "Tu shall." That's actually a reference to Lenny Henry. I'll probably get done for cultural appropriation there. Yes, this is once again a reply to Stefan Molyneux, and the subject I'm going to reply to him about this is one I was quite surprised when he raised this subject. Actually, he raised it in his call-in show. It wasn't his call-in show. It was his like a live stream, FDR 4752. It's also called Happy New Year from Free Domain. New Year being this year. He published it on January the 1st. And he discusses ayahuasca. Yep, the drug. The drug which is used by the Amazon Indians for healing and spiritual knowledge. And it's a big, long, complicated subject I have covered in several other videos and on articles, which I put links to in the description box as always. So you can always look at those for background. But basically, if you haven't heard of ayahuasca, I'll explain as we go through this particular video. But I'll just show you. I've my little notification jingle, because I think everyone wants to know about that. Where is it? Yeah. I choose a different one for every one of these reply videos. The last one, I think it was Steve mumbling, and I chose Professor Brian Cox. Billions and billions and trillions of stars. The last time it was Molyneux, it was Phil Bitchell, wasn't it? And then it was Christy Winters. It was a sound of a cow mooing, which was completely coincidental. And with this one, it's this.
Hash smokers are greatly favored in this endeavor because you really need leather lungs.
That there is Terence McKenna, the great aficionado and great promoter and expert and lecturer and writer on the subject of mind-expanding substances, talking about smoking DMT. Now, it's interesting because DMT is the active ingredient of ayahuasca, and I'll explain more about that in a minute. But there he is discussing his own experience of smoking DMT, because it can be smoked as well. That's a short, 15-minute video he did about that. But oddly enough, this is interesting because I found this out from reading a book, which I'll tell you about in a minute. It's actually DMT, the Spirit Molecule by Rick Strassman. People who smoke DMT often have a different experience to people who take ayahuasca, even though the active ingredient is the same. So that's a very, very interesting little project there. But I thought I'd put Terence in there for the purposes of... I think it was quite appropriate to this particular video subject matter. Also, Niall Murphy, if you're watching, hope you appreciate that. You're a big Terence McKenna fan. Check out Niall's channel, by the way, Through the Opaque Lens. It's very, very good indeed. So, let's begin. I've got a recording here of this particular program. Now, as always, I have edited it down. This is not to misrepresent. This is not for the purposes of misrepresenting my subject. I believe I have... While I've been editing this video down, it's actually like a 40-minute video. I've edited it down to about 15 minutes, and that's because most of it is not on this subject. It's only like the first third of the program he talks about ayahuasca at all. And then in the middle of that, he rambles and he goes off on digressions, and I've cut those out. But this is not to give a distorted view of Stefan Molyneux's position. I have endeavoured to maintain the point. I've endeavoured to treat him respectfully and present his opinions, I think, correctly. I've not made any effort at all to distort his message. And I have a link in the description box to the original program. So if you don't believe me, go and watch it yourself. So, here we go. Where is it? Hang on. All right, hang on. Let me find the correct file, and we shall begin with this little talk about Stefan and what he talks about. Here we are. There we go.
What are your thoughts on ayahuasca?
Right, first of all, I should point out that some people try to overpronounce the word. The word ayahuasca, it's a strange word. It looks foreign. Indeed, it is foreign. It's spelled Ayahuasca, pronounce ayahuasca. But I mean, so he was trying to sort of overpronounce it there, ayahuasca, using some strange phonetics which don't exist in any known language, because it's a word from the Amazon Indians. It's actually pronounced simply ayahuasca. It's perfectly easy to pronounce. It looks strange because of the letters in it. Now, we've got to realise is Spanish does not have the w sound as it is written in other languages with the letter W, like such as English, for example. It doesn't have that sound. So the letter W appears in the Spanish alphabet, but it's only used for foreign words, loan words, borrowed words from other languages. So what happened was, before, originally Spanish had no letter W. So what the Spaniards did when they encountered foreign languages with that w sound, which, as I said, does not exist at all in Spanish, is they used a HU sound. They used the letters H and U, to mimic the sound of W, wa. And today, if you speak to Spanish today, if you speak to Spanish people today, sometimes you'll find their accent often mispronounce the words with the letter W in. They'll say like one day or 1 week, one day or 1 week, or something like that. They'll aspirate it a bit. 1 day or 1 week, 1, 2, 3, or something like that. You know, that's how Spanish people speak, because they're not used to articulating the w sound. So Stefan is, I don't think he knows that. I think he's just making a joke here. But he is kind of, he's speculating about the pronunciation of a word, making it sound like it's very complicated. But it's actually a very simple word to pronounce. It's a word borrowed from the Amazon Indian languages, whichever one it is. I mean, there's other words for ayahuasca. It's something called yahe. It's a particular language, because they speak thousands of languages in the Amazon. It's one particular language from which Spanish borrowed the word ayahuasca, which was then subsequently passed on to English. So Stefan is like, I think he's playing for the audience again, like he does.
That's a very good question. I promise I will get to that. So ayahuasca. So tell me if I'm wrong, but isn't ayahuasca? I'm probably not pronouncing it even rightly. It's not.
That's right. Yeah, he understands that, I think. Yeah. He just doesn't know.
It's supposed to be a commandment that sounds like Germans invading Poland. Ayahuasca!
I do like the guy. I think he's funny. He's always entertaining to watch, even when he's talking complete crap, as he sometimes does in this particular video.
But isn't ayahuasca that drug somewhat like peyote that the South and Central Americans take, that's supposed to be like 20 years of therapy in one night? Is it?
Hash smokers are greatly favored in this endeavor because you really need leather lungs.
No, not quite. It's something very, very different indeed. Peyote, I know what he means. Peyote is like a spinous cactus or succulent, and it contains psychoactive alkaloids, in particular mescaline. Now, mescaline is a substance which actually produces a similar effect to ayahuasca. It puts the person who ingests it into an altered state of consciousness. So some of the other native peoples of the Americas used peyote as a source of having spiritual experiences, because it has that same effect. I mean, I do recommend there's some books. If you've ever read the series of books by Carlos Castaneda, they're kind of hippie classics. There's The Teachings of Don Juan, Road to Ixtlan, I can't remember, the Different Reality. There's like 3 main books, and then there's loads of like ones that came after with notes in, where it's about a man who goes and he meets up with this like Red Indian shaman, who my character Flying Buffalo of the Roswell trilogy is partly based on that character, I must say. And they call it mescalito. He calls it mescalito. He calls peyote mescalito for that reason. But it's not like ayahuasca. Peyote is something which, if you pick it up and you eat it, you'll get a mescaline trip from it. It exists in its form, in its natural form, in its completely intact and complete form, if that's not a tautology, within the plant itself. It doesn't need any processing. You just go out, you pick it. I do recommend The Last of the Medicine Men by Benedict Allen. Now, he's a guy who he basically travelled with some Mexican Indians. They go on like a pilgrimage. They all get on they just basically hire a coach and they go on this big long journey, which is like a pilgrimage, where they go up into the high deserts and they find the mescalito, the peyote cactus, and they eat it, and they go through this ritual. It's very, very interesting. Now, ayahuasca is very different. Ayahuasca is nothing like peyote, because ayahuasca, firstly, it has a different active ingredient, DMT. But what happens is ayahuasca is actually a concoction. It's a clever mixture. It's actually artificial rather than natural in its, or the substances exist in its natural form, which you would just take. It's artificial. It's actually a very clever mixture of two plants, and the resulting mixture put together generates edible DMT. So what it is basically, it's this artificial mixture is the ayahuasca vine. That is its scientific name is Banastropsis capi. It's a form of tree creeper, and that contains something called, it contains a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, and that's very important. Now, this is because what happens is the other ingredient is called chacruna, which is also Psychotria viridis, and that contains DMT. That's N-N-dimethyltryptamine, DMT. Now, the thing about DMT is you can't take it orally normally. If you grab some leaves of chacruna and you shove them in your mouth the way you would a peyote succulent, you will not. It'll do nothing for you. It'll have no effect at all, and the reason is because you have something inside your stomach called monoamine oxidase. It's part of the digestion process of your stomach, and it essentially destroys DMT on contact. Now, what happens is the chacruna, which is also called Psychotria viridis, to give it its scientific name. What happens is the chacruna with the DMT in it is mixed it's mixed in this pot. What they have is they get the Banastropsis capi, the ayahuasca vine, the vine of souls, as it's called, or the vine of the dead, and they cook it. They cut it into strips, and they put it into this big cooking pot, and they put leaves on top, and they put another layer of ayahuasca vine, another layer of chacruna, another layer of ayahuasca vine. It has to be done properly, in accordance with the process. What's more, if you go in an ayahuasca workshop, which I'll describe a bit more in a minute, you'll find that you have to do it yourself. It's all part. It's a long process. You don't just turn up and tune in and drop out. If you go on an ayahuasca workshop, you have to go out into the jungle and you have to pick these plants yourself and cut them and cook them and prepare them yourself. You have to be part of the cooking process. It's all part of the to get the. I don't know exactly what it is, but the shaman insists on it so that the spirits are friendly towards you. So it all has to be arranged in layers in this pot, and then you basically fill that with water. You cook it, boil it up, and after a while you have to. I can't remember what happens next. I think you have to pour it into another container, and then boil it again, and sometimes add some more of the ingredients until it's boiled right down. And what you have left until basically it's boiled almost dry. But what you have left is like a dark sludge, and you have to then add more water, a little bit more water to that to get it the right consistency. And you can leave it to cool down. You can put it into bottles. I mean, if you're going to put it into a plastic bottle, you have to let it cool right down, although so it doesn't melt the bottle. I'll tell you what, some books I recommend here. I'll tell you more about that. I'll bring these books up in a minute, but this one I think is a good one. Let me just get the camera back so I know I've got it in the right place. Graham Hancock's Supernatural. This is, you can see, it's an absolute doorstep. This is the Atlas Shrugged of psychedelic studies, which is a reference Stefan will appreciate. And it talks about other things like cave paintings, but then it goes on to talk about ayahuasca. And at the beginning, it mentions ayahuasca as well. And there's an interview with Rick Strassman in here, and Graham Hancock describes his own journey down this route, because he used to be into ancient mysteries, Ark of the Covenant, ancient civilizations, monuments. He used to dive down on old stone ruins on the seabed and things like that. If you remember Quest for the Lost Civilization and Underworld and these documentaries he made, there's books there's some very good books he wrote as well. He's an excellent author, actually, Hancock. That I recommend. That's very good. And also this one, DMT, the Spirit Molecule. And this is by Rick Strassman. And this will be coming up again. I'll keep these handy because I'll show you them again in a little while. This is basically, it says here, Doctor's Revolutionary Research into the Biology of Near-Death and Mystical Experiences by Rick Strassman, MD. A brilliant cover, as Alex Gray does this artwork, and he's a really good artist. Basically, he was doing research into the way these substances affect the brain as a proper scientist. And so he decided to do some of these experiments by giving people DMT. Now, that was highly illegal. He had to, because of United States is a very. He was American. He lives in New Mexico, and the US is very strict on drug control, as you know, if you've as some of my viewers know, because they live there. And he had to go through all kinds of legal and ethical and organisational loopholes, but he did do the experiments. At the end of the experiment, he was quite surprised by what he discovered. Because he was expecting to find out that, oh, this is very interesting. It's interesting the way the brain sort of concocts these images and things like that. But his end conclusion was that in a nutshell, the patients, the subjects, the guinea pigs he was using, were put into altered states of consciousness, and what they actually experienced was actually not just a phantasm of their brain. It was something real. It was something from basically the altered states of consciousness, and how you perceive other realities, but they were real. He wouldn't expect that. It changed his life. So I do recommend those books, certainly. But ayahuasca, basically, it's really amazing. Of all the plants in the Amazon, and it's a huge jungle with millions of species of plants. But the shamans have discovered basically an amazing combination. The leaves of one plant that contains DMT, and then another plant which contains a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. So when the ayahuasca vine, once you've cooked it up and turned it to sludge, it contains both the active ingredient and a substance which shuts off the body's ability to produce the chemical which destroys it on contact, which allows you to take DMT orally. It's an absolutely incredible feat when you think about it, isn't it? It's an incredible coincidence, to use that skeptic terminology, isn't it? Yeah, you could actually eat and digest DMT in a way which you couldn't otherwise. I mean, Strassman had to inject them. He had to intravenous. He had to inject them intravenously. Anyway, let's let Steph Boy continue.
So, ayahuasca, with all due respect to Mike Cernovich, is annoying, pompous, self-referential bullshit, frankly.
Hash smokers are greatly favored in this endeavor because you really need leather lungs.
Was it pompous? What can't remember. Pompous and all these other things he said? Bullshit, frankly? What's all that about Mike Cernovich? What's Mike Cernovich got to do with anything? I didn't know Cerno had an interest in this sort of thing, but I have to check that out because he's an interesting guy as it is. But if Mike Cernovich is interested in this stuff, I'll have to see what he has to say. But was it self-referential? What was he saying? Oh, blimey, I can't remember all those insults. But anyway, Stefan, that's not an argument. To quote your favourite phrase, calling something all those names is not an argument. What is it you keep saying? Stop using adjectives and give me an argument. Explain to me why I'm wrong. I'll let him continue then. I'm sure he will explain why he thinks we're wrong.
Everybody wants a shortcut. Everybody wants a shortcut. I remember there was a Bloom County cartoon from the oddly named Berkeley Breathed from many years ago. It had a penguin, and the penguin needed to lose weight. And the penguin was like, I'm going to go on the all-avocado diet and stuff like that. And I'm going to drop pounds like it's a miracle, right? And his friend was like, shouldn't you just, eat less and exercise more? No.
Hash smokers are greatly favored in this endeavor because you really need leather lungs.
Okay, so he's comparing this to fad diets. Okay, I actually agree with him about the fad diets. Now, you always have these sort of things. People who are desperate to lose weight, which doesn't include me, even though some of you might think I should. Whenever you go online or you go anywhere and you say you express your desire to be thinner, to lose weight, you'll find your spam box full with, because it's like with spam bots, with spam dexing. The moment you say anything online, all the spammers detect it and they come on, they close on you like a bunch of Big Brother salesmen. filled with all kinds of different diets. There's the keto diet. There's the Atkins diet. There's the spaghetti and Guinness diet. Believe me, that works. You know, there is one, spaghetti and Guinness. My brother actually is a big time slimmer. He's been battling with his weight his whole life. And he went on the spaghetti and Guinness diet. Whether it worked or not, I don't know. But yeah, there is no shortcut to losing weight. If you want to lose weight, you have to eat good food and exercise. You eat better, exercise more, and that's as simple as that. And I mean, if you eat good, believe it or not, like I'm actually fitter than I look. I actually do exercise quite a bit, both in my work and leisure, and that means gym exercise and exercise at work, and my diet is actually pretty good. Now, if you actually do that and you still can't lose weight, then you just have to accept. You have to accept yourself the way you are. You're just naturally globular. But going on these fad diets doesn't work. I mean, and it always costs money, doesn't it? You've got to buy this book. It tells you how to do it. Visit these classes, £20 an evening or something like that, you know. But this is it's a false comparison. What Stefan is saying here is that these kinds of this healing, this kind of chemical healing, which is done by the shamans in the Amazon and the shamans in Mexico and other places around the world where they provide healing, sometimes using psychoactive substances, it's exactly the same. You don't need to go to psychotherapy. You don't need to work it out. You don't need to go to group sessions and things like that and improve your life. Just take this little pill and it'll all go away, and you'll be a better person. And so he's comparing the two together, but that's completely unfair. That is totally and utterly unfair. That's what I want to say. I've gone a long way around saying it, but that's basically what I want to say. So carry on, Stefan.
Like everybody wants a shortcut, right? Everybody wants a shortcut. So beware people who are like, oh, forget that high and hard road. What you really need to do is pop a couple of tabs of this and you'll be just great. And no. Okay, I'm sorry. That's like the, take a pill and lose weight, or you get that, looks like a masturbation practice machine, that exercise machine, or the things that...
Well, I don't know what those look like, Stefan. Maybe you do. I mean, maybe you've got one of those. I don't.
I don't know if they're still around. Would send electrical currents through your middle and you'd be, quote, doing sit-ups while you were watching TV. You'll get abs. Nope. Pretty much you'll destroy your muscles and get cramps, I think. So, yeah.
Oh, that's the stimulation of the nerves, yeah. They use it actually, it's a painkiller. Pregnant women take them when they're in labour, but you just stick these things on yourself, and it gives you like spasms in your belly and things like that. It looks horrible when people are doing it. It looks like they've got like something vibrating inside them. I would never try that. It looks awful. It must be very uncomfortable.
Everybody wants to give you a shortcut to self-knowledge, to wisdom, to truth, to virtue, and I'm telling you, man. Oh, this is the annoying thing that comes from being over 50 as I get to lecture people. Next thing you know, I'm going to be wearing suspenders that rise up to my nipples. I'm going to be...
Oh my God, what a disgusting thought. If you do that, Stefan, please don't publish any pictures.
Wearing baseball caps and sitting on a porch, whittling something the size of a tree trunk and complaining about the Kennedys. But anyway, I get to talk about the big picture view because I've got the big picture view, man. That's it. I've cashed in on the post-half-century truth. I got the big picture view. I've seen everyone. I've seen the story arc, people. This is not what's going to happen next. Oh.
Hash smokers are greatly favored in this endeavor because you really need leather lungs.
I got.
No, what he's saying now, that's actually, he's being very arrogant and very narrow-minded. Sorry, Steph, but you are. Age is not a guarantee of wisdom. I know lots of people who are older than me, who drive me crazy because they're so ignorant and they're so obtuse and they're so unintelligent. It makes it more likely you know more when you're older, but it's not a guarantee. Like, for example, I believe I'm wiser now than I was 20 years ago or 30 years ago. I believe I am wiser now. I won't tell you how old I am, but I'm sort of in Stefan's kind of ballpark, and I have actually improved over the course of my life. And Stefan, based on what he said about his past, has also done so. He has also improved himself. Now, but there's absolutely no guarantee of that. I mean, I met this bloke. Oh God, he was a bloke I used to know ages ago when I started in the NHS. I became a trade unionist. It was just, I think I was hardcore probably for less than a year. I really saw through it very quickly, and I could make an entire video on how awful it is and how much I went into there very enthusiastically and came out very cynical about the whole thing. And it didn't take long, I'm pleased to say. I'm pleased to say that literally within a couple of years, I was over it. I was past it, and I left it behind me because I thought it's false. It's nasty. It's a very, very unpleasant philosophy that they have. It's full of hatred. It's full of envy. It's full of bitterness. It's full of typical working class paranoia. And I didn't like it. And like I said, I could say a lot more about that, and maybe I've done it in past videos. Maybe I'll do it in the future. But literally after about a year, I was fed up with it. Now, there's a bloke I knew there. I won't say what his name is, but I knew him when I was involved in this. He was actually in our branch of Unison, and I saw him again just a few months ago, and he's still in it. He's now like a convener. He's like a regional convener for Unison, and he's still involved in trade unionism after how many years? 30 bloody years or so. And he has not grasped what I've grasped about it. I mean, he would probably say that about me. He'd say Ben went off the rails when he was really good. For a couple of months, I thought he was on the strike, but then he lost it. He went crazy. He started talking rubbish, and today he's a complete UFO believing conspiracy nut. He'd probably say that about me. But age, what I'm saying is that this bloke, I didn't debate with this guy. I have debated with him in the past, but I think he's completely wrong, and he's probably about 20 years my senior, but I think he's gone completely off the wrong rails. His age has not made him wise, in my view. And I've known people younger than me, considerably younger than me, who astound me with their insights. And people in my age group, Niall Murphy said something amazing. If you please do watch his channel through an opaque lens. He said something amazing the other day that really got me thinking, and it ties in directly with what this particular video and the ones I make about spirituality and things like that. He said, I think we should call it actually Murphy's paradox. It goes like this. It's to do with neuroscience and the consciousness. If the brain was simple enough for us to understand, then we'd be too stupid to understand it. Incredible, isn't it? If that's from a man roughly my own age. This trade unionist, like I say, 20 years older, wouldn't have. He'd go, "What are you talking about, mate? You must be stupid. You must be getting into all this bourgeois religious cultist stuff. Religion's the opium of the people, and stuff like that." So, yeah. So sorry, Stefan. I know you are an intelligent chap, but simply saying, "Oh, I'm over 50 now. I know everything, or whatever, or I can lecture people." No, you can't. You got to provide an argument. What you say is as falsifiable as something the 18-year-old would say.
There's a big reveal at the end. No. I've seen the story arc. I've seen people.
I've seen the light!
From the age of 11 to their mid-50s. I have seen more than you have known. I have seen attack ships on fire in the arms of Orion, or whatever the hell that line is.
Oh, don't start perverting and misquoting Rutger Hauer's characters. That's from Blade Runner. Rutger Hauer played a hospital porter, as you know if you watch Shagley, because I did a review of the TV series Porters, the comedy series.
So I've seen the story arc. There's not a lot of surprises left, and the story.
Oh, Stefan, mate, you could live another, based on average life expectancy, you've got another 20 years left in you, mate. You could go on longer. You could go on. I mean, people live till they're over 100 quite routinely nowadays. You have many, many surprises left in your life. Believe me, you're only 55. You're still in middle age, mate. Don't get on top. Don't get above yourself. You have stuff to learn. We all have things to learn, and I think will there ever be a time in my life, if I'm 95, can I have a look, think, well, that's it, I've got it all now, I've got it all worked out, mate, I don't think so. There's always new things to learn.
Jack is pretty clear, and it's pretty brutal. There is no escape from conscience. There is no escape from immorality. There is no escape from exploitation. There is no escape from cruelty or
Who's trying to escape from these things? I'm not. The people who are involved in ayahuasca workshops and the shamans are not. What are you talking about?
brutality or any of these things.
Hash smokers are greatly favored in this endeavor because you really need leather lungs.
Sorry, I interrupted Stefan a little bit early there because I put in a notation jingle. But basically, what's he talking about here? He's saying it's crazy. I mean, was he saying that people who take ayahuasca or take mescaline or these other chemical therapies, which the indigenous peoples of the world used, are they trying to escape from a bad conscience? They're trying to. No, it's quite the opposite. I mean, if you read Supernatural, I could never even begin to find it in this absolute epic of a volume, but you know, Graham talks very, very candidly about his own life, how about he was ruining his. This helped him. The ayahuasca actually helped Graham Hancock overcome some very, very destructive behaviour. He talks quite openly about this. He mentioned this on the Joe Rogan Experience as well. This is before Joe Rogan went stupid and went to Spotify when he was good. Hancock says, you know, I was screwing up my life. I was ruining my marriage. My wife couldn't bear to be around me because I was paranoid. I was bad-tempered. I was all these sorts of things. I was smoking too much weed, basically. As he was abusing cannabis. Again, cannabis. I mean, I put some link in the description box to an incident where I took cannabis. In fact, there were 2 times, and the first one is linked into that article. But it could be a very, very beneficial drug, but it can be abused. And the second time I took it, I wouldn't say I abused it, but I had a very unpleasant experience. And Hancock was basically ruining his life with this. And it was ayahuasca himself. It was ayahuasca itself, the goddess he encountered, who talked to him about this while he was on this drug and helped him turn himself around to make himself a better person. Ayahuasca is not about escaping conscience and escaping all these other things. You just take a pill and all this past, all this karma goes away. Not at all, Stefan, not at all. Quite the opposite. If you actually study this subject, you'll realise that. So I interrupted him a little bit early there, but let me continue. Let him continue.
You know, the only thing that you can do if you've been dishonest to yourself and to others is you construct an alternate reality where falsehood equals truth, lies equal honesty, corruption equals virtue, and this is all postmodernism. Postmodernism is the scar tissue of people who've been tricked into behaving badly that need to create an alternate reality wherein their evils or their corruptions are somehow integrity and virtue, right? That's all postmodernism is. It's the scar tissue of a bad conscience.
Hash smokers are greatly favored in this endeavor because you really need leather lungs.
That's very interesting what he just said, because basically he's right. That's exactly what postmodernism is. It is psychological denial. I know people, including close members of my close family, who have done that, who have basically manipulated reality and lied because they themselves feel guilty or they feel bad or because of things that happened to them in the past. I'm thinking of doing another video about that at the moment, actually, but because, well, there's been an update in that situation, but I'm not sure whether to do it. I certainly won't do it just yet. But, you know, I know people who've done that. This is something I've endeavoured to try to avoid. And I hope I've succeeded, I don't know. But I know other people who've not succeeded. I know other people. You know, I was talking to Slaxer about this because he was saying whenever he gets into arguments with family members or friends, he carries a body camera, so he records what they say, and then afterwards, when they come back and they basically misrepresent how the argument went, he plays them the recording. We know I tried to do that once with a close member of my family. It was actually my grandmother. All right, it was my grandmother, I'll tell you. When I played her the recording afterwards, and she still denied it. She pretended, she just ignored the fact I was playing a recording of her own words. She just pretended. She just ignored it. She continued, she doubled down, she continued with her deception. So what Stefan said there is interesting because it's absolutely right. And if this had been in another video, I'd have said it's very interesting. Carry on listening, because he has done other videos on this subject, and they're very well worth watching. Stefan Molyneux he has real pearls of wisdom sometimes when he's not talking crap like he's in this video. It's only when he talks crap I make reply videos to him. Don't get me wrong, there's a mountain of other things he's done which are really good, which I don't make reply videos to. The problem is Stefan is attaching what he's just said to ayahuasca and the therapy associated with chemicals, and there he's wrong. And I think he's incorrect to make this association between what he's just said and the ayahuasca phenomenon.
All of this agenda crap and like all of this stuff, all of it is just, I'm getting real comfortable here, people. I'm just telling you. So when it comes to ayahuasca, there's this idea, and if your friends are telling you to take it, you got some dangerous friends, man. Because what they're saying.
No, you don't. No, if your friends might have had positive experience with this. If Graham Hancock, I mean, I'm actually in this situation right now because I know someone who did an ayahuasca workshop in Ireland, and if getting over to Peru and that is expensive, and going on this. It's very expensive to do this. It costs like several £1,000s to do an entire workshop. Especially if you travel that far, there are cheaper options. And this person took one of the cheaper options. They went to Ireland to do this, and they said, well, you should try this, Ben, and maybe I should. This isn't a bad friend. This is. He's wrong there. He's totally wrong to say, you've got bad friends if they say that.
Saying is, okay, you could pursue self-knowledge, truth, and virtue, which will be a multi-year, it's a lifetime study.
Correct, yes. And that's what you've done. I try to do that as well.
Or what you could do is just take this horrible, ghastly, mind-altering substance, and suddenly magic occurs, right?
The two are not mutually exclusive. I'll give him a chance to finish because there'll be I'll wait for the notification jingle.
Magic occurs and you just gain wisdom and truth and virtue.
Hash smokers are greatly favored in this endeavor because you really need leather lungs.
Absolutely not, Stefan. These two things are not mutually exclusive. It's not. You just say, well, I spend a lifetime on self-knowledge and self-discovery and self-improvement. I can either do that or I can take this horrible substance, this foul-tasting substance, and it's a shortcut. No, the people who suggest this, they're not trying to wreck your lives. They shouldn't be anyway. If they've had positive experiences, they're quite right to share them with other people. But firstly, the stuff does taste horrible. Hancock describes it as being, and it's very often people say this. I mean, they talk about it being, engine oil and stuff like this. Just tastes a bit like engine oil and chocolate, old socks, sour milk. It's foul tasting stuff, and it's not meant to be taken recreationally. You don't drink it because it's nice. When Benedict Allen was taking peyote, when he was eating little pieces of peyote, he would have to eat like a slice of orange afterwards just to get rid of the very, very bitter, rank taste of this cactus. But it's firstly when you say drugs, I mean drugs covers everything. Drugs is simply a word for any chemical you put in your body that has some kind of effect on your body. Whether it's just that drugs is used. The word drugs is used for medication as well, isn't it? Aspirin is a drug. It has a medicinal effect on the body. Paracetamol is a drug. These are all chemicals you put inside you to have some kind of effect. Sometimes it's psychological, sometimes it's physical. In terms of aspirin, it's physical. It neutralizes pain. But it covers everything. It covers everything from ayahuasca to crack cocaine. And to lump all these things together is totally illogical, and I think it's misrepresentation. It's misrepresenting the phenomenon of ayahuasca and these other psychoactive substances, these entheogens. I think that was a term coined by Terence McKenna. Actually, it literally entheogen means it brings the God within. It's and I said Graham Hancock used this drug, which it was. Ayahuasca is a drug technically, to overcome a very destructive lifestyle. He was misusing cannabis. He said he'd taken too much of it, and it was having a bad effect on him. As his relationships with other people were breaking down because of it, and he overcame that. Ayahuasca basically helped him overcome that. They basically, the goddess he was referring to basically said, "Look, you carry on. You are destroying your life. You're destroying your spiritual life, your relationship with others, things like that." And he managed to overcome that. Anyway, let Steph carry on.
And they're trying to wreck your life. They're trying to wreck your mind. They're trying to wreck your brain. I have no respect. I have no respect for the people who tell you to take drugs rather than pursue self-knowledge.
But the two are not mutually exclusive. I just told you that, Stefan. Pursuing self-knowledge, taking drugs, these things are not, it's not either or. The drugs I'm referring to are a part of that pursuit of self-knowledge. It's not a substitute for the process you envisage. It's an auxiliary. It's an assistant to that. It actually helps that. No one's saying you shouldn't do the things that Stefan has done. Stefan has had therapy. He goes through some of the healing processes that he's been through his life. Taking ayahuasca or something similar it's not a substitute for what Stefan has done. It's something that's a part of that which other people have used and Stefan has chosen not to. That's all it is. He's talking about these two things as if it's mutually exclusive. It's either or.
No respect. In fact, I have great contempt. It doesn't mean that somebody who says that is a bad human being. They may just be unaware or unknowledgeable or...
Hash smokers are greatly favored in this endeavor because you really need leather lungs.
Stefan, I think you are the one who is not knowledgeable here. I know you are not a bad human being, but you are the one who lacks knowledge here. You really are not. You don't understand what you're talking about. I mean, that's not. I don't think that's not really. It's not a failure of morality or virtue, to use your term, on your part. It's simply because you've not looked into this, and I advise you to do so. I've already given you some suggestions for further study, and I'll give you another one in a little while. Let's let him carry on.
But no, it's a horrible thing. It's a horrible thing to do. I've seen the story. I've seen the people who tried using sex appeal. I've seen the people who tried becoming wealthy. I've seen the people who tried to work on their bodies obsessively.
What's this got to do with ayahuasca?
I've seen all of the people who went for, say, ambition or greed or status or sexiness or dating or sex addiction, or they tried all of these things to be happy.
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying, Stefan, all right? And you're absolutely right. I mean, there's people who try to find happiness through conformism by conforming to the values of society and trying to improve themselves in terms of their exterior. It's what David Icke calls combing the mirror. Indeed, I mean, you and I have both read The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand, and we know that what you're describing is Peter Keating. It's the start of the book is about these two guys, Peter Keating and Howard Rourke. Howard Rourke is, funny enough, he is a guy I really identify with, because he's very similar to myself in terms of my own philosophy, especially professionally. Peter Keating, Howard Rourke goes his own way. He has a passion for what he does. They're both guys are architects. Howard Rourke has a passion deep within him for building. He says, "I want to build." He says, "I'm not learning architecture to serve my clients. I'm not learning to build so I can serve my clients. I'm looking for clients so I can build." Peter Keating is like combing the mirror, a second-hander. Ayn Rand called him. He goes to work for a big firm. He kisses ass. He plays office politics. He undermines all his rivals within the promotion sphere. He even kills one of them. He drives one of them to death. He drives this old man into an early grave. He's a horror, and he's not an evil person. I mean, Rand portrays him sympathetically, but he believes that the way to success is through external attributes. It's just for external appearances and where you stand within the status hierarchy of human society. It's a very pseudo-psychopathic attitude he has. He ends up marrying. He ends up in a horrible marriage to a woman he really shouldn't get involved with. Things like that. I think Stefan's probably maybe thinking of Peter Keyes in here, but it's got absolutely nothing to do with ayahuasca.
And I've seen the story arc, man. I've seen the wreckage, all of these addictions, all of these.
Yeah, so have I. It's true. I know what you mean. I know what you mean. I know the people. Well, you give your example first, because he's going to give an example now.
These substitutes for virtue leave in their wake, and man, it's brutal.
Hash smokers are greatly favored in this endeavor because you really need leather lung.
All right, he hasn't given the example yet. He's going to in a minute. It must be in the second bit. But yeah, I mean, I think he's going slightly off topic here. The only reason he's going off topic is because he's bringing up topics he thinks are associated with ayahuasca and are not. But there was this guy I knew, or there's several people a bit like this, but this is a particular person. This is a person who, basically I talk about popping the questions, in my hospital porter stuff. On the gas banner. If you don't listen to the gas banner, go and listen to it now. Panmo Radio /the gas banner. He was a porter who went up the ladder, man, and he became an operating department practitioner, which is kind of like a theatre nurse. He didn't really want to do this. He actually wanted to stay as a porter. He loved portering, but he felt he had to. He wanted status more than anything else. He wanted to climb that greasy pole, and compete with others for superficial admiration. And he was a guy who really looked down his nose at me. He was sarcastic, he was snide. He used to go, "Oh, I've got a degree, Ben. I've got a degree." He kept repeating that to me. "Did you know I've got a degree?" He had this sort of rather camp voice. I think he was a closet homosexual. Not that it wouldn't have bothered me, but it doesn't bother me if he is. But if he is gay, why don't you just say it? Just you don't have to pretend these days. "Oh, I've got a degree, Ben. Did you know that? I've got a degree." And he used to really talk to me like I was just nothing. And he hated the fact that I was a porter and I was proud to be a porter. He hated that. Well, he ended up he's in jail now. He started stealing. Well, it's funny we're talking about drugs here. He started stealing drugs from the hospital and selling, not just for his own use. I mean, several nurses and doctors and other people have been caught stealing drugs, controlled drugs, basically the street drugs and things like that for their own use, such as diamorphine, which is like heroin. So one doctor was even caught making up imaginary patients to prescribe them to. He was taking them home and taking them themselves. No, he was stealing them to sell. He stole drugs to sell and made a lot of money, but he was caught and he ended up in jail. So yeah, that's exactly what Stefan's talking about when it comes to wrecking your own life. And this is a man who everyone thought was wonderful. He was like at the top of the heap. He was top of the pile, man. He in terms of conventional status, he'd achieved 1,000,000 times more than I ever had, because he'd become this. He got a degree. He was like very senior within nursing. He ended up like a senior nurse, like an F-grade nurse. That's the equivalent of like a senior sister on a ward or a matron. And he strutted around like a peacock, talking to me like I was nothing because I was just a porter. But I'm walking free and he's in jail now because he stole drugs to sell. As me, I worked as an honest man. As a porter, I was an honest porter. Anyway, I'm sorry, I don't want to digress too much. I'm going off on one now. These are stories I should save for another video. Sorry, I don't want to make this too long.
It's brutal. I knew one guy, very cynical, rejected truth, reality, and reason, and ended up, it was horrible. He dumped garbage on his wife's head during an argument, like picked up the entire garbage can, dumped it on her head. I can't, it's unbelievably incomprehensible to me. I have this lovely marriage, a wonderful wife, and the idea of doing anything to hurt, bully, humiliate her in that way is almost beyond comprehension to me. So,
Hash smokers are greatly favored in this endeavor because you really need leather lung.
You know, I'm pleased to hear it, Stefan. I know you and Christina are very close, and you talk about your wife and your daughter. And indeed, if you're chucking rubbish bins over people's heads, you're pouring them over people's head. That's not a happy marriage, is it? So yeah, I absolutely agree. But this is nothing to do with the. You're really going off in a direction away from the subject you're talking about. You don't even realise it because you have assumed that everything you've just said in the last 10 minutes or so is somehow connected to taking ayahuasca.
Yeah. So here's your big kind of test, right? It's a pretty simple test, right? It's a pretty simple test. So if you look at the Greco-Christianity traditions of Europe, right? I don't think Judeo-Christian is particularly the way to describe it. It's kind of a new coinage. The more accurate is, you could say Greco-Roman Christian. But I think the Romans were kind of like the China of the intellectual world. They copied more than they innovated. And
that's true, actually. There's the guy who wrote the history of Wales. He said that the Romans essentially were copiers rather than innovators. That's true, but that's another subject.
If you look at sort of Greco-Christian, you have a very strong focus on introspection, on self-knowledge. As Socrates said famously, the unexamined life is not worth living. Now, it's kind of a clever thing to say, but it's not particularly true because it certainly is worth living for a lot of people.
Hash smokers are greatly favored in this endeavor because you really need leather lungs.
Well, first, he's not just Christian. I mean, he's referring to the Greco-Roman Christian, basically basis of Western civilization, which is where it all comes from, where the world we have comes from. Basically, Christian morality comes from Plato. The idea of Christian morality comes from the ethics of the ancient Greeks. The idea of heaven and hell comes from Plato. Things like that. He's done entire videos about this. But the ayahuasca has a completely different origin. It was actually developed in prehistoric times by the Amazon Indians, the native people of the Amazon rainforest. And it's estimated probably several thousand years ago they came up with this. They've been taking it ever since. So it has a completely different origin to what you're talking about.
I mean, they end up having you get a kind of flush of power out of escaping morality. Like escaping moral injunctions, you get a flush of power, like you're going to get away with something. And that's why people do it. That's why moral injunctions exist, to counteract that thrill of power that you're going to get away with being corrupt or lying or being a bully or being a coward. And you're going to get away with all of that stuff. And then, of course, it catches up with you and wrecks your life.
Hash smokers are greatly favored in this endeavor because you really need leather lungs.
Well, I don't know if you're talking about yourself personally there, Stefan, but the only people who get that rush of power from doing something bad and then not being caught are psychopaths or pseudo-psychopaths. And as I've said on previous videos, I've done an entire video on this, I think, recently. Which one was it? I think it might have been actually the nice guy one, my previous reply to Stefan, which was in November, where I talk about psychopaths and pseudo-psychopaths. I interviewed Thomas Sheridan as well on Panama Radio. We discussed psychopathy and pseudo-psychopathy. But basically, psychopaths may be about 6% of the population, but pseudo-psychopaths are probably more than 50%, maybe even as high as 70% of the population. But only those people will get that rush of power. I don't know if you're speaking personally, Kev, because Stefan, I don't think you're a pseudo-psychopath. Certainly not a psychopath. You have a conscience. Some people, only a minority of people have consciences these days because of pseudopsychopathy, which is pseudopsychopathy is something artificially generated within society by propaganda, by peer pressure, by all these other things. Psychopathy is something innate to a person's nature. But I discussed that, I think, in the Nice Guys video I did for Stefan, or the humiliation one. It's one of the ones I did last year to Stefan Molyneux. I can't remember which one it was. There was a link in the description box to the last one, and a link to the one before that in the subsequent links in that particular video. But moral injunction really doesn't exist nowadays. Maybe if we were a more Christian society, we would have that, but we don't. But again, you're going off topic here, Stefan. You really are.
So, there's a strong degree of introspection that goes inward. Now, introspection is really, really important. So introspection I spent years in therapy. Introspection is very, very important.
Yes, it is.
And yet, it can very easily turn into self-obsession, solipsism, narcissism, where all you do is look at your internal state, and then it also can turn into a sort of pathological guilt situation where you say, because I'm so introspective, I'm going to view every conflict in my life as something that I can manage by changing my thoughts and actions. So it can very easily get into this sort of pathological altruism, this really, really crazy stuff where you just take ownership for everything. It's kind of like a European problem as a whole. So that process of self-knowledge, of self-examination, of understanding the roots of your feelings, which generally are thoughts or at least judgments, and then the connection between judgments, feelings, and actions, and trying to navigate that.
Hash smokers are greatly favored in this endeavor because you really need leather lungs.
I mean, he's absolutely right there. It's when you begin the healing process, and it could be, as I said, introspection. It could be exactly what he suggests there. Introspection is simply examining your own thoughts. It's something that apparently there's a large number of people not capable of doing that. I mean, you may have heard of the non-player character phenomenon, which has come out recently. I expect if that's the case, then there's a connection between pseudopsychopathy and NPC, because if NPC exists, because apparently there's a lot of people who do have no internal dialogue. If you're an NPC, you have no internal dialogue. You're not a psych. NPCs are not psychopaths. NPCs do have empathy for others. They have they have a sense of morality. They have a sense of conscience. They get upset about other people, but they don't have the ability to change their minds through internal dialogue because they have none. They can only change their minds through external mental stimuli. But again, so you're right about that. But again, maybe I should have cut this little bit out and covered it in another video, because you're not. We've now been going for quite a long time, and you've sort of gone from ayahuasca onto this. It's very interesting stuff, Stefan, it really is. But I hope you'll come back to ayahuasca at some point.
I mean, I remember, this is crazy. I mean, it's really, when you think about it, as a kid, I remember being 5 or 6 years old, and I would play a game with myself. I wasn't lonely, okay, I was a little lonely, but I would play a game with myself, and that game would be something like this. I would say, I'm thinking of a red fire truck. Right now I'm thinking of a red fire truck. How on earth did I end up thinking of a red fire truck? How strange. And then I'd say, okay, so before I thought of the red fire truck, I thought of a road. And I was thinking of a road because I stubbed my toe yesterday. And then on that very same road, I saw a bad car accident. And I saw people getting pulled out of the car. The car was burning, and there were fire trucks. So I would sit there, and I would follow the breadcrumbs of my own thoughts back until I couldn't remember.
Hash smokers are greatly favored in this endeavor because you really need leather lungs.
What's he talking about here? I mean, see, I've done this. I don't know how many of you have, but I've done exactly that. I want to trace back my train of thought to its origins. And I do. It's quite funny, especially when I sort of like wake up in the morning. I'm thinking about this. I think, well, how did that happen? Where did I get to this? It's actually quite a good way of actually breaking insomnia, because, like, Stefan actually suffered from insomnia a long time ago, and I get it now today occasionally when certain thoughts come into my head at night. By retracing those steps, I can sometimes find the origin of how that thought came into my head. And therefore I can kind of move on to something more cheerful, and that usually gets me back off to sleep. So you see, I've never taken ayahuasca, and I like I said, I've taken something at some point. There's a link in the description box. On 2 occasions I took cannabis, which was probably mixed with something else. But you can read about it there. But you know, I gel with what Stefan's saying here.
And it was just kind of it's an interesting game to play, believe it or not. I mean, you should try it sometimes. Okay, I'm thinking of this. Why am I thinking of this? Oh, I thought of that. And it's just a way of following your own thoughts to get a sense, because there's some stuff that we will within our own minds, that there's some stuff that just happens to us, like the general chatter of all the machinery clanking away in the skull prison of our minds, right? So introspection is very important and very helpful, and has produced, right? If you don't introspect, it's very hard to get empathy. If you don't understand your own thoughts and feelings, it's hard to connect to other people's thoughts and feelings. Or at least if you're not curious about your own thoughts and feelings, it's going to be hard to be curious about other people's thoughts and feelings. It's like being more curious about other people's bank accounts than your own or whatever, right? It just really doesn't make a lot of sense. Or being more interested in other people's sex life rather than, say, your own.
Oh, I know people like that.
It's not particularly, doesn't make much sense. So you start off by being curious about yourself, and then it leads you to being curious about other people. And of course, killing curiosity within children kills empathy, which is why propaganda is so destructive to children, because propaganda says, here are all of the answers, and if you question them, you're bad. That kills curiosity in children, which kills empathy over the long run, because the most important thing, the most important three words in any relationship are not, I love you, but tell me more. You want to be curious about the other people and what they think.
Hash smokers are greatly favored in this endeavor because you really need leather lungs.
Yeah, it's off topic, but he's absolutely right there. It's interesting that Stefan has come to similar conclusions about pseudopsychopathy that I have. It's funny because I came up with the term pseudopsychopath before I even started watching Molyneux, and as I watched him, and I've watched as much of his stuff as I can. I really respect the guy. I've given him donations and things like that. I mean, I really do like a lot of what he says. It seems he's come up with a similar idea, and he expressed it there. But again, we're still waiting for he will get back to ayahuasca in a minute. Don't worry.
So if you look at introspection cultures, and really there is only one that's really strong, which is sort of Western European Greco-Christian culture. If you look at those cultures, they created the modern world, they ended slavery, they brought more equal rights, and then eventually excessive rights to women, because it always goes, whenever you have a government, the revolution never knows when to stop, it just keeps going. So those cultures have produced the best treatment for children, the best treatment for women, the best treatment for minorities, the best treatment for empathy, too much empathy, I think, to the point where self-interest becomes selfishness in this view. But those cultures have produced great things, and they did not produce them through snorting some weird sub-Andes cocoa plant.
Hash smokers are greatly favored in this endeavor because you really need leather lungs.
Well, Stefan, it's been a long way round, but you finally come back to the original subject, and you're trying to tie in what you've been saying through half of this video now to this particular subject. And now we're getting to the bottom of your position, which I think is my main criticism of you. Firstly, you say Western cultures are the only ones with any real introspection, or this process you talked about. No, they're not. If you look at the work of people like Li Po, the Chinese poet, a guy I've mentioned before, Akbar the Great, Emperor of India, the first Mughal Emperor of India, and his philosophy. If you look at others, like I mentioned Carlos Castaneda and what he discovered about the Amerindians, things like that. So you think you're right. It was Western cultures were the first ones to, as you say, initiate universal human rights, and that comes very much from Christianity. It's got to be said. The abolitionists, the people who suggested perhaps we shouldn't have slavery, were they were actually Christians, and they were white people. The wokists hate that fact, and in fact they ignore that fact, but it's true. It was white people, white Western people, who first suggested abolishing slavery. Indeed, the British Empire was the first signatory of the 1805 Declaration of the Abolition of Slavery. Yeah, that's right. They don't teach you that at university. And there's reasons for that, of course. It's cultural Marxism, as I don't need to go into detail about that. But you say that we created this without snorting some foul stuff from a pipe in the Andes. Okay. Well, firstly, I said that a lot of it comes from Christianity, which is true. But I suggest it also comes from ancient Greece, which I know you're a big fan of. You're a kind of amateur classicist, I would say. But if you say, "Oh no, that didn't happen. That never happened in the West. It was only these primitive savages in the Amazon who did this sort of thing." Well, I suggest you look at the Greek oracles of Dodona and Delphi. I suggest you look at those. I'll play you a little clip. I'm going to play a little clip about that in a minute, actually. But basically, these oracles were. It's often thought that they were just these women who used to swim in ponds in a cave, and they used to come and they used to just rabbit off all kinds of prophecies and weird stuff off the top of their head, and people used to sit and listen to them, and these sort of this wisdom would come through them. But actually, what happened was the people who used to go into these caves to listen to the oracles used to take the drink of the Aleutian mysteries. Now, this was a drink. No one knows exactly what the ingredients were, but it's said to contain barley and rye. Now, as you know, if you study this subject, you know that barley and rye often when they're left in the wet, they often develop a fungus on them called ergot. Now, ergot is highly toxic, but there are different molecules in ergot, different chemicals, and a certain Albert Hofmann in 1938, I believe it was. He found a way to synthesize one of the chemicals in ergot, and that is the chemical we call LSD. Now, what I suspect is that the people who were drinking the drink of the Aleutian mysteries when they went to see the oracles at Dodona and Delphi and other places like that, they were given this stuff to drink. Well, it's possible that the ergot on the barley and the rye, through some natural process, they filtered out the toxic substances within the ergot and were left with basically a natural form of LSD. So the people who went to see these oracles were dropping acid. These are the ancient Greeks. Stefan, these are the people who gave us Aristotle. You know your video on Aristotle? Do you remember you did a video on Plato where you slagged the guy off, but then you treat him sympathetically and you explain why you think he went down the wrong path. And then you bring up Aristotle, who you put on an absolute pedestal, just like Ayn Rand did. Well, this is the culture that produced these people. And what about the Stone Age carvings? Now, one of the most interesting things about this book, Supernatural, is that Graham Hancock starts taking an interest in ancient artwork. And he believes, incorrectly I think, that basically we were not fully human until roughly the 40th or 50th millennium BC. That's what he claims. I don't think he's correct there. I go along more with Richard Rudgley and his ideas, if you ever study his work, where basically he believes that humanity goes back right into the beginnings when we first started walking upright. But this is sometimes called the human revolution because people started producing artwork in caves, and some of it's amazing. Well, guess what? Some of it was in Europe. The seat of the West, Stefan, where the Greeks came and the Romans and all these sorts of people, these abolitionists. And these people like Aristotle who created logic and ethics and these sorts of things. And you know what? Hancock has discovered distinct evidence, or he commentates on distinct evidence, there's a guy called David Lewis Williams, this South African bloke, that the people who produced the cave art in various parts of the world, in South Africa but in other places, but also in Europe, in southern France and places like that, were taking psychoactive substances. They weren't going to the Andes and snorting on a pipe. They were producing it right here in Europe. And these are our ancestors, Stefan. Both culturally and biologically, they are our ancestors. And there's Soma in India. I mean, India has had a huge, it's had a massive impact on modern thought, especially in the 20th century. Firstly, India was extremely introspective. I mean, India produced the Buddha and these Hindu sages and people like that. But guess what? They had this thing called Soma. I mean, it's mentioned in the Vedas, which is basically prehistoric. The Vedas were written down. They're basically written down. They're the written form of prehistoric musings of the ancient Indians. Oh, and guess what? The Romans. What are the Romans? Right, the Romans used to eat a specific fish. They used to be at parties and their orgies. They used to eat a specific fish called the Salema porgy. Now they called it the dream fish. And it's actually you can find it in the Mediterranean. If you eat it, it has hallucinogenic effects, including auditory and visual hallucinations, and it can give you lucid dreams for several days. You eat it, and about 2 hours after you eat it, it can give you a very powerful trip that can last up to 3 days. And in fact, the Arabic word for the dream fish is the fish that makes dreams, because it affects you at night time, not just during the daytime. The reason for the hallucinogenic effects of the dreamfish are on certain types. Basically, you have certain types of algae, you have phytoplankton and things like that, which gets into the meat of the fish and makes it hallucinogenic. And I know, I'm a complete anorak, aren't I? Yeah, all that stuff. I didn't write that stuff down with ayahuasca with notes. It's like really, I'm an absolute bobble hat wearing obsessive, I know, yeah. But they used to eat like lots of these fish to get like a really massive a massive high in Roman parties. All across the Roman Empire, they used to take this. And the kyklon, right? Kyklon. This is ancient Greece again. Kyklon it comes from the word to stir or to mix things up, and it's made from water, barley, naturally occurring substances, sometimes with wide and grated cheese. Oh, sounds disgusting. But it's believed that kyklon was a psychoactive compound brew. As in the case of the Eleusinian Mysteries, a kyklon was used as the climax of the Eleusinian Mysteries to break a sacred fast, but it was also mentioned as a favourite drink of the Greek peasants. So this is right from the highest class people to the lowest class people were ingesting these psychoactive substances. So when you say, oh, Western civilization achieved all this without smoking some pipe on the Andes, well, in other words, taking some kind of psychoactive substance to assist them in their mental state, you're completely wrong. I'm just going to play you a little clip now. I want you to. I'm reproducing this out of fair use. This is covered by fair use, I think. It's only 4 minutes long.
I don't really know of any ancient civilization.
Yeah. So this is Graham Hancock. It's a clip from a Graham Hancock lecture. So I hope you enjoy it.
Which achieved a high level of functioning, which didn't use psychedelics. Psychedelics were.
What Graham Hancock just said here is the absolute opposite of what Stefan Molyneux has just said. Molyneux has just claimed that the only fully ethically and logically functional civilization the world has ever produced did so without using any psychedelics. Hancock has just said the exact opposite. So which of them's right? Let's him continue, then we'll discuss it.
Astonishingly widely used in the ancient world, and used very carefully with great attention being paid to what we now call set and setting. So, for example, you can go to Chavin de Huantar, about 200 miles north of Lima, turn right, drive up into the Andes, 14,000 feet, drop down into the Chavin Valley, and you'll find yourself in an ancient archaeological site, the largest part of which are galleries below the ground, which were used in ceremony in ancient times, and that ceremony involved the San Pedro cactus.
That's rather like the oracles, isn't it? They were in caves under the ground, in big underground ponds. They used to swim around.
It involved in which mescaline.
So the San. Oh, sorry. I'll rewind that a little bit again. Sorry, because he brings up mescaline.
Pedro cactus. It involved in which mescaline is the active ingredient.
Now, the San Pedro cactus must be similar to peyote, or even the same thing. I don't know.
And when the conquistadors came there, they couldn't understand what all this was about. Why had they?
The conquistadors were the Spanish conquerors of basically the Americas in the first wave of conquests. I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute.
They created these great galleries. What was going on? We now know what was going on. They were creating a setting that would maximize the effect of the psychedelic of choice, which in their case was the San Pedro cactus. If you go to Eleusis in ancient Greece, it's a ruin now outside of Athens, but for more than 2,000 years, until the 4th century after Christ, Eleusis was the beating heart of the ancient Greek world. And again, like Chavin de Huantar, it turns out that there are enormous underground galleries, darkened spaces, which they called the telestrion. We now know what was going on there. The initiates in the Eleusinian Mysteries came and drank a brew before they went down into the telestrion.
So he's kind of repeating what I've just said, but he studied it more closely, so he's probably more accurate to the exact facts.
That brew essentially was LSD. It was a non-poisonous form of ergot growing on barley, which they then harvested and cooked up in the brew called the kykeon. So no wonder when people went down into the telestrion, into those darkened spaces which were subtly lit here and there, that they would have life-transforming experiences. Plato was an initiate, Sophocles was an initiate, Cicero was an initiate, Pindar was an initiate. They all said that the experience they had had in the telestrion after drinking the brew was life-changing. They lost utterly their fear of death. They knew that death was not the end, but just the beginning of the next great adventure. And those spaces were the heart of everything that was good and worthy and worthwhile about ancient Greek culture.
So, Stefan, did you hear what he just said? Is he wrong? Is Graham wrong, or are you wrong? Because you've just asserted that the psychedelic experience, altered states of consciousness, were never a part of the development of Western civilization. Maybe you should reconsider. I find it interesting, incidentally, that he mentions the caves and how the caves were lit, and I can well believe it, because if you go into a cave, and I've been into caves in places in the West Country where they have they have lights and candles and things like that, and it does create an amazing setting. I went in there without taking anything other than having a pint in the pub just beforehand, but it did give me a strange feeling. And let's remember that Plato went into these caves, and Plato, of course, talks an awful lot about caves, doesn't he? You know about the allegory of the cave, which is an amazing thing. Indeed, Stefan knows about this because he described it he did a 4-hour video all about Plato. It was very interesting. I think he was unfair to Plato, but it was a very interesting assessment. But Plato describes the universe as a cave, where we're essentially sitting in this cave with our back turned to the entrance, and there's a fire in the cave which is casting shadows of objects behind us against the wall, and we're looking at those shadows lit by the firelight, silhouetted by the firelight. Yet, and we believe that's the real universe. Yet, all we have to do is turn around, looking over our shoulder. We'll see the fire that's casting those shadows. We'll see the objects whose shadows are being cast, the three-dimensional objects. And what's more, we'll see the entrance to the cave and how we can get out of the cave. And maybe Plato had this insight from his psychedelic experiences in the chamber, as people do, as people like Terence McKenna and others have had in more recent times. So yeah, I think this is something I think Stefan Molyneux needs to take on board when he makes these pronouncements.
And it's a comment upon the way that civilization has gone, that it was fanatical early Christianity that destroyed Eleusis and that put an end to those rites that had been so life-affirming and so life-enhancing.
Correct. As Christianity basically became... basically, when the Roman Empire fell, the Illuminati basically took over the Roman Church. To this day, I mean, they still run the Vatican. If you go to the Vatican, you see Illuminati symbolism everywhere. You see the big Egyptian obelisks, you see domes, you see all kinds of other things which have nothing to do with Christianity. In the regalia on the priesthood, the things that the priesthood wears and things like that. It's absolutely no doubt that Christianity is the church. I've got nothing against Christians. I've got nothing against people who find a genuine spirituality through Christianity. I used to be a Christian myself, but the church as an institution was indeed run by the Illuminati. To quote Michael Elner, religion to destroy spirituality. And one of the things they did was they destroyed things like this, the indigenous cultures. The Roman Empire destroyed them in the pre-Christian age. I'm not going to have a Boudica moment now, don't worry. In the post-Roman Empire age, the church, which basically took over from it, destroyed, they burnt witches all across Europe. And then a few centuries later, when they went over to the New World, they milked the minds of the shaman and then killed them, to quote Credo Mutwa. So yeah, this was an Illuminati operation. And it's been running for 2,000 plus years.
For so long.
And the burning of the Library of Alexandria as well, I should mention that.
True, frankly, all around the world. Whether you go to ancient India, whether you go to ancient Mexico, of course to ancient South America. In South America, we have a whole pyramid city called Caral, which has only been excavated in the last 15 years. And archaeologists went to it with their prejudices. Nobody could have created a huge place like this unless they were highly domineering and hierarchical and making war on others. Turns out there's no evidence of warfare whatsoever at Caral, but what there is evidence of is the massive use of hallucinogenic snuffs from the Amazon. So this great culture that built the largest pyramids ever created in the New World, pyramids that are 5,000 years old, this great culture...
I've not heard of this place. I'll have to look it up. Because I know about, for example, La Venta and Teotihuacan and Copan and places like that, where there are ancient Mayan and Aztec sites. But what's this Coracal? I've never heard of that. And it's old as well. I mean, 5,000 years is really old. So that's amazing, isn't it? Yeah.
was founded upon and based upon the import of hallucinogenic snuffs from the Amazon and the free interrelation of peoples without any warfare.
Yeah. It's interesting about warfare. I mean, contrary to a lot of people, I mean, Slaxer just made a video about this, where I think he does make a mistake, because warfare is not universal. There are societies without warfare, like the Çatalhöyük culture in Turkey, the temple builders in Malta and things like that. Well, they just didn't fight war. They had no need to fight war. But those cultures did have violence in them. And what they used to do is they used to play very violent sports. The native peoples, the North American Indians, the Amerindians of North America, they invented lacrosse, which today it's played by girls at school, but in its original form, you'd probably, in every match, you'd probably lose a couple of players. They'd be killed, and many would be injured. And this is to do with, I think I mentioned this in other videos, this is to do with natural human aggression, especially men who need to find some release for that aggression. In the absence of warfare, we tend to invent other ways of doing it. But if it's in a sporting environment, it's much more controlled and much more civilized. So I don't have a problem with that.
You can find this all around the world. Psychedelics have been central to human culture from the very beginning, and I think that goes right back to the Stone Age, to the Upper Paleolithic. There's
the cave paintings. Yeah. Again, please read that book. Fascinating stuff.
A moment when a light seems to go on in our ancestors' heads all around the world, and they start producing art that is definitive of visionary experiences. They are depicting visionary experiences, and that's the moment that we get.
Let me just find some of these. The pictures are amazing. I mean, I know he's got illustrations of the artwork. He's got ayahuasca. This is Pablo Amaringo. These pictures are by Pablo Amaringo, who's an ayahuasca artist. And I won't hold it. It doesn't do them credit to hold them up to the camera, but the cover there you see is actually a Pablo Amaringo image. But there were like images of cave paintings, which I can't find now. But you read the book and you can look it up. There's some of them. So there's some cave paintings. But I said this book is too big to go through. But there's some more. But there's absolutely no doubt there's a similarity between Pablo Amaringo's art and the cave paintings from 40,000 years ago.
Get this huge step forward in the evolution of human behavior. We're already anatomically modern, but the software wasn't there. It looks like it was psychedelics that provided the software that brought about modern human consciousness.
I think if you look at Richard Rudgley and what he's written about the past, he doesn't agree, and I think Rudgley's right. We did have the software before then. The thing about it was, though, that there's no doubt there was a massive cultural shift and a revolution of extraordinary proportion, a kind of renaissance around that time, and it happened across the world almost at the same time in every society on Earth, including places that apparently had no contact. Maybe it was the Jungian collective unconscious. However, Hancock's wrong when he says that before that he says, oh, it was all dull, incredibly dull. So he's wrong there. And Rudgley's right in that respect. However, Hancock, I think, does make a good point about the fact there was this kind of renaissance sometime in the mid-40th to 50th millennium BC.
We are now in a process of reversion from that. We need to correct that course. We need to return to the course of expanded consciousness, of dissolved boundaries, of openness to the universe, and to the spirit of love and nurture, which is fundamental to the human experience.
Yeah, absolutely. This is an important point, because the regression, I think, is I don't have time to go into it now, but it's deliberate. Like I said, it's part of this same agenda by the Illuminati that started with the desecration of Mona, the Druid heartland in North Wales, and the destruction of the shamans, and what he described, the destruction of the Eleusis mysteries by the church and things like that. But anyway, let's go back to old Steffi. What's he got to say now?
Like, that's just not what happened. The path of self-knowledge is tough, it's rigorous, it's difficult. It's like the path to eating well, or the path to exercising and maintaining your health. It's complicated, it changes over the course of your life, and blah, 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 right? So it's complicated and it's challenging, and that's exactly what you would expect from virtue. If virtue was easy, the animals could do it.
Hash smokers are greatly favored in this endeavor because you really need leather lungs.
Well, the animals, I mean, by meaning non-human animals, because of course humans are a form of animal. Some animals actually do have a sense of moral conscience, and indeed they enforce social morality within their communities, because they're social creatures and they need that. They've evolved it the same way humans have. In fact, that harkens. Do you remember my dolphin reply video to Stefan? Oh god, that was funny. I actually did a reply video to Stefan Molyneux a couple of years ago about dolphins. But yeah, I mean, the path to virtue, of course, is not. It is difficult. It's an adventure. It's a journey that can take your whole life. Indeed, usually does. But it's absolutely insane. It's incorrect. I've just explained to suggest that somehow that is, if you can do it without psychedelics, fine. But the idea that you either do it that way or you use psychedelics and then forget all the other things. Forget the lying in hammocks, forget the intellectual endeavours, forget the philosophy of ancient Greece, forget everything, just take a tab and then just chill out, is wrong. What Stefan is describing here essentially is a phony war. It's a false dichotomy. Let him carry on.
So, if you look at sort of Central and South American cultures, which, this ayahuasca comes from, or something like that. If you look at all this...
It's from the South American, it's from a specific area, the Amazon jungle. There are others areas across Central and South America where they use different substances, but it comes from, the region, basically the North and South America, all have their own traditions and their own methods of gaining knowledge through chemicals which alter the mind.
Crap. And
it's not crap.
Look at their cultures. I mean, was it the Aztecs or the Mayans that sacrificed 70,000 human beings in one day?
Hash smokers are greatly favored in this endeavor because you really need leather lungs.
No, Stefan, the Aztecs did not sacrifice 70,000 people in one day. It was actually closer to 100,000. And this is an important point because, of course, when Cortez and Pizarro and these conquistadors turned up in Spain, they saw this and it was just so wholly other, as Michael Wood says, the historian Michael Wood. But they did it because they believed they had to. So they did indeed take 100,000 people at a time on certain days of the year, and they ripped their hearts out in a ritual on... basically on an altar in a temple. Have you ever seen the film Apocalypto? They actually show that happening. It's a very gruesome film. They believe they had to. This is the opposite of Christianity, where in Christianity God gives his blood to redeem man. With the Aztecs, man must give his blood to redeem the gods. But I mean, I'll tell you what, here's a good book to read. This is The Conquest of New Spain by Bernal Diaz. Now this is actually a very old story. Bernal Diaz was actually a person involved in this in the 15th century, and this is basically his memoirs. This is actually a first edition paperback from 1963. I bet see how yellow the pages are. The newspapers in the Skull Experiment were not that colour, so we know they were real. But I love the smell of an old book. It's a really interesting book actually. So it's probably a collector's item actually. I should hang on to it. There are more recent editions, but this describes the whole thing from a first-hand witness's point of view. Very interesting. In a sense, though, it's not that different to us. In a sense that our civilization sacrifices too. We sacrifice millions sometimes to maintain our values and structure, but whether they're real or imaginary. If, for example, you love talking about cultural Marxism, like if a white man kills himself because he can't cope with the guilt of being a white man, that is a sacrifice by the cultural Marxist establishment, which I know you're against and I'm against too. But I mean, there's other things like, people say, well, why don't we just feed the world? Why don't we just give all our food to the world? And we say we can't. We can't because it's an economic impossibility. It would ruin the economy. So people are starving. You can't just give them food. You see what I mean? It's like that in a sense. The Aztecs didn't do this because they just like ripping people's hearts out. They developed a belief system, a false one as it turned out, because They don't do it anymore, but the universe hasn't, the gods haven't destroyed us. But they did it. They believed they did it because they believed they had to do it to keep the universe going. They're only unique in the scale of their killing too. I mean, the execution and the priest, as Michael Wood says, have been hand in hand from very early age. The Bible has stories about sacrifice. What about Abraham and Isaac? This is a story that horrified me when I was a kid. God said to Abraham, "Take your son Isaac, who you love, and offer him as a sacrifice to me." And so Abraham obeys, and then God, at the last minute, the angels come down and they stay the hand with he's got his knife and he's about to kill Isaac, and they say, and God says, "Isaac, stop, mate, stop. I was having you on, mate. I was messing with your head. Sorry about that. I was just testing you. I was testing you for loyalty." This is the Bible, man. This is the Bible. Abraham, he's the foundation of the Judeo-Christian world. Yeah, no one who complains about the morality of that. I did. I said to my dad, I kept saying to my mum and dad, "You wouldn't do that to me, would you? If God told you to sacrifice me, you wouldn't do that." I said this when I was a little kid, and in the end they said, no, of course we wouldn't. We couldn't. Of course we wouldn't. But it's Michael Wood goes on to say that shedding blood is symbolic of our, it's symbolic. It's like something very deep in our minds because of our years as hunter-gathering. The symbolism of shedding blood is very powerful. Bartolomé de las Casas, a defender of the Indians, he said that the actual Amerindians held solidarity of the universe above everything, even human life. So as horrible as it is, they were only doing what they believed they had to. Is the doctrine of double effects. So yeah, they could kill 100,000 people, and they don't do it anymore, and I'm glad they don't do it. It was a terrible thing that needed to be stamped out. But they did it. They didn't do it because they were evil. They did it because their culture had led them into a mindset where they believed they had to do it. So that's a very, very interesting side of it, isn't it? Yeah.
I remember being down in Mexico, and I think some place like Chichen Itza or something like that, where they showed us a football field where the football was played with a human head.
It's actually like it wasn't football exactly, but it was more like netball or basketball. They had to throw the head around. But yeah, they did. They did, didn't they?
Brutal on children, rape as a weapon of war.
Hash smokers are greatly favored in this endeavor because you really need leather lungs.
Not so. This is where, again, you should read this book. This is a very interesting book here about from the first hand about the conquest of New Spain, which is basically the old name for Mexico. It was actually this idea of using innocent people, innocent bystanders, as in war, was something completely alien to the Aztecs and Incas when Pizarro and Cortez actually invaded the area. They actually didn't believe in that. They fought rather like medieval knights with the ideas of chivalry. You know that in the Middle Ages there could be a war. Wars could break out. There could be one just a couple of miles from you, and you would never even know it was there because the participants, the belligerents, would just leave you alone because they believed in chivalry. Indeed, there's evidence to suggest that the pre-Illuminati cultures in Britain were like that, and in Europe. It's actually Cortez and his army and Pizarro and his forces. They use these tactics. These tactics, for example, they'd lay siege to a town, and then they'd starve people out. Now, this is a completely alien idea of warfare to the native peoples of South America. They just weren't. This is just something you just didn't do. It was considered to be so unethical that you wouldn't do it to your worst enemy. But it was actually Cortez and people like him who did that. It was the conquistadors who first introduced that into warfare. Now, I can't speak for every single culture within the Americas. I'm not one of these kind of eco-feminist, oh, wouldn't it be all wonderful if we all went back to primitive life kind of people. You sometimes get in Glastonbury, people like that. I know very well that indigenous people is capable of evil. I've just talked about the natural aggression within us all, especially men, which is why they invented brutal, cultures that had no warfare, didn't fight wars, invented very dangerous and violent sports. And there's people like the Jivaros, for example, who are very, very violent indeed. But if you're suggesting that somehow that's the idea, these kind of might is right ideas were indigenous to the Central and South American people. You're wrong. This was when these ideas introduced into warfare were introduced by European settlers.
Enslavement as a regular condition of human life.
No, that's correct. They took slaves. Slavery was everywhere, as it was everywhere. And this is something the wokists don't like, because they say there was no slavery before white people. White people had the only people who had slaves. I mean, literally, there are people in the United States today, educated to university level. If you ask them, well, how many cultures in the world had slaves, and they'll say British Empire and North America. Let's say it was the British Empire, the American colonies, and the United States. No other culture ever had slaves. And of course, because it fits the cultural Marxist agenda, no one will ever correct them. Stefan is one of the few people who actually takes on the noble task of correcting these idiots and in this evil nonsense. So, what do you suppose? If Stefan expects me to argue with him that the Aztecs and the Incas had slaves, then he's not going to get that from me. You need to go to bloody Sedona, mate, if you want to hear people disagree with you there.
Torture as a regular condition of, even in tribe, you would torture people in tribe, pulling out human hearts while they were still alive.
It's pretty incredible when you think about it, but that's exactly how they executed people. You'd be tied down on altars. Contrary to popular belief, some of these sacrifices were voluntary. People used to actually offer to do this to appease the gods. They'd offer themselves up to appease the gods, and they would lie down voluntarily. The executioner used to get basically a knife, a big dagger, stab it, open you up, literally like a surgeon would, but very, very brutally, and pull your heart out. And sometimes it was still like moving and beating like that. If you watch, like I say, watch Apocalypto by Mel Gibson. It's an interesting film.
Just bottomless levels of human savagery, right?
Hash smokers are greatly favored in this endeavor because you really need leather lungs.
Okay, I don't know why I put a notification jingle there. I can't remember why. I just go to my Again, what's this? This really is not connected to ayahuasca. What he's just saying. Everything you say is true. Oh, as I said, apart from the warfare element, but as far as the slavery goes, yeah, it's true. But would this not have happened if these communities, these cultures, had not used psychoactive drugs? Would that have taken it? Would it have lifted that burden? Would it have taken it away? Anyway, the Aztecs didn't use ayahuasca. Ayahuasca, as I said, was exclusive to the South American tribal people of the Amazon. The city-states of North and Central America, and indeed South America under the Mayas, didn't have that at all. So you've got to ask yourself, even if every word you said was true, and it's not, what's that got to do with ayahuasca? Would it improve or disprove ayahuasca? I mean, would things improve if they hadn't done that, or would it maybe improve if they seen as they had, or they perhaps taken it more? I don't know. But Stefan doesn't address this. Again, he's kind of talking at cross purposes to the subject.
So if access to these mind-altering substances, which was very common in many of these cultures, if access to these mind-altering substances produced such great self-knowledge and wisdom and virtue and empathy and so on, then why were the cultures so relentlessly, brutally violent?
Hash smokers are greatly favored in this endeavor because you really need leather lungs.
Well, because they're human. That's it, because they're human. Firstly, not everyone took them. I mean, I'm not sure that the access to these substances in ancient Mexico and the ancient Maya culture. We're not talking about the Amazon here, of course, because the Amazon Indians were a completely different culture. They're as different from the city-states of North and Central America as Yorkshire is from the Cossacks of Eastern Europe. So I don't know exactly how much access people had to these drugs within these city-states where they practice human sacrifice. Not everyone who takes them turns into a flawless angel. Some people have bad trips. Set and setting. I myself had a very, very unpleasant experience taking a substance, which there's a link in the description box where I talk about that in an article. There's a link in that particular article to another one where the first time I took a substance, it was much more pleasant. But not everyone who takes them, firstly, not everyone takes them, Stefan, in any society. Secondly, not everyone who takes them, it doesn't do good to everyone who takes them. Some people, if people don't get the setting right and they abuse the drug, it can actually have a negative effect on them, make them worse off. It doesn't turn, very few people take this drug and the very next morning wake up as priests of High Atlantis. But you've got to ask yourself, because you've already discussed, incorrectly, that the Western civilization, these experiences and this kind of this culture of taking mind-altering substances was completely absent from all of Western history. That's what you've argued, and I've proved to you that's not correct. I've talked to you about the dreamfish. I've talked to you about the Aleutian mysteries and the oracles and the LSD in the brew which they drink. Yet our culture doesn't go around ripping people's hearts out. We don't have temples in London where 100,000 people die and have their hearts ripped out. So ayahuasca is not a shortcut to perfection, or indeed any other substance. But it just seems that we have two cultures here. We have the Western culture and the cultures of the city-states of the Americas. Both of us used mind-altering substances and were put into altered states of consciousness. One side, you say, developed into something very healthy, and the other side remained barbarous and primitive in terms of its ethics and logic. Yet both of them took these substances. So I think you need to work that out, Stefan. You really do. Let's have a go.
This isn't, I mean, I hate to say it's not that complicated, but it's really not. Oh, peyote, it's going to be wonderful for your self-knowledge and blah, 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 blah. It's like, okay, well then, why are these cultures that take it so incredibly brutal and violent?
Oh, again, I've just addressed that.
You know why in many places in Mexico is the, quote, age of consent 12 fucking years old?
Well, that's terrible. If it's 12 years old, I mean, that's appalling, But Mexico today is not. Obviously, the people are racially, and they are mostly the Mexicans. They're a mixture of the indigenous people and Spanish people from Europe. Also slaves that were brought over from Africa. Like in Brazil, there's a lot of people of African descent or mixed African native descent. In terms of the history, yeah, of course, the history has an influence on the modern culture. Yet today, most of the cultures of the world have so many other influences. You can't necessarily attach the fact that it's legal to have sex with children in one country and say, oh, it's because 2,000 years ago someone took a mushroom. You can't say that. There's not necessarily a connection between the two, not least because in our culture, which arose out of the ancient Greece, which is the foundation of European wisdom in terms of civilized life, European philosophy, European science, all these other things, we were also taking mind-altering substances, yet we understand in our culture that sex with someone below a certain age is immoral. So logically there's no connection there, which proves there's a connection between these two.
Hash smokers are greatly favored in this endeavor because you really need leather lungs.
Oh, sorry, I should have let him finish his sentence. Well, basically that was the notification jingle that I was going to play before I went on to this bit, so I'll let him carry on.
Why is there so much child abuse in the Hispanic community? It's crazy.
Hash smokers are greatly favored in this endeavor because you really need leather lungs.
Why is there so much child abuse in the Hispanic community? What does Hispanic mean? Hispanic is a word, basically, it comes from Spain. But it's in the modern world, it generally means anyone who lives in the Americas who speaks Spanish. And that's about it. Well, that's 422 million people out of 1 billion. 1 billion people live in North and South America. Spanish, therefore, is by far the most widely spoken language in all of the Americas. Almost half the people speak Spanish. The other half, the remaining half, speak a mixture of Portuguese and English, mostly in the United States and Brazil. Canada, of course, is English and French-speaking. The United States now has many languages in it. Its official language is English, but Spanish, I think nearly 50% of people speak Spanish at home. Now that when you say Hispanic, you mean all of those people. And Hispanic, like I say, simply really, I think primarily it means a language group. But we get this before, and I know Hugo Rune is going to jump in right now in the comments section, because it's like we use words like Semitic to refer to certain cultures. I mean, it's often used for Judaism, but really, Semitic is a language group. It includes Arabic, Hebrew, Aramaic, and things like that. The same way in Britain we use the word Celtic. Celtic, of course, refers to the peoples and cultures of Scotland, Ireland, Wales, and Cornwall, and Brittany in France. We use Celtic. But they say we often use the phrase Celtic people, Celtic culture. But what is it about those people that are Celtic? Celtic is actually a culture that arose in Europe and thrived during the first millennium BC. It doesn't exist anymore. There is no Celtic people anymore. There's no Celtic culture. Celtic culture didn't die out. Celtic culture influences the modern world, but there is no Celtic culture any more than there is Roman culture or ancient Greek culture or Egyptian pyramid building culture. We use the word Celtic to describe these countries simply because they speak a language there which is actually a modern descendant of the Celtic languages that were spoken back then. That's all it is. Funny enough, there's that word Latin as well. People refer to Latin Americans. It basically means the same as Hispanic. So are you saying that within all those people, 422 million, which stretches from all the way from southern United States to the southern tip of South America, that child abuse is a huge problem there? Well, see, if it is, of course, that needs to be sorted out. But is it worse there than it is in other places? Is it worse there than it is in parts of Europe, where, again, according to you, no one dropped any tabs? So, again, there's no real logical connection here, is there, Steph?
No, these people are trying to smash your machinery. They're trying to hurt you. Now, we would say it's conscious or unconscious, I don't know. But the people who want you to take drugs in pursuit of self-knowledge, they're trying to wreck your machinery. I mean, I said that clearly and openly and all of that. And
the people who want you to take drugs are trying to wreck your machinery. That describes some bloke who comes up to you on the streets and says, "You want one of these, mate? It's £5 and I'll give you one of these," knowing you'll come back for more when the price rises and things like that. You know, people who are selling various drugs, that's someone trying to wreck your machinery to make money out of you. You cannot compare some bloke in an anorak skulking on a street corner with a plastic bag in his hand. You comparing that person to an Amazon shaman with a tradition dating back thousands of years at a healing ceremony for people. Stefan, I really don't think you see the difference between these two scenarios. I really think you don't. You don't understand, and that's a shame, because it's not. What you're saying is false.
if I'm wrong, tell me.
Hash smokers are greatly favored in this endeavor because you really need leather lungs.
Yeah, that's kind of what I've just done, Stefan. I'm jumping slightly ahead of my jingle notices because I've sort of been rehearsing this for a while, yeah. But that's what I'm doing, Stefan. I'm explaining to you why you're wrong.
The idea that you can just take a drug it's like, you understand, the drug screws your mind. The drug screws up with your perceptions, right? You know, one of the most powerful processes of self-knowledge that you can have is to sit in a hammock for 6 hours straight, don't listen to music. Some of the greatest insights I've ever had is when I have just, in a sense, forced myself, because I've got a lot of hamsters running in the wheel in my brain, right? Force yourself to slow down. Force yourself to stop. Don't have a tablet, don't have music, just sit and be with yourself. Let your mind wander. You could say it's meditative and so on. But that's how you do it.
Hash smokers are greatly favored in this endeavor because you really need leather lungs.
Yeah. Do you know what? That's absolutely true. Contemplation is very, very important. And if people can find a way to do it, it's always a good way of doing it. I mean, for example, David Icke. David Icke, of course, is trained in public speaking. He's trained as a broadcaster. But the man himself is quite an introvert. And he likes his privacy. He likes to be on his own. He likes solitude. And he often talks about how he'll go for long walks through the countryside of the Isle of Wight, just himself, no books to read, no music playing in his earphones or anything like that. He'll just walk through nature, and he'll think. And Yeah, that's a good thing. Lying on your hammock, of course. Yeah, it's what you. I know you're going to talk some more about your hammock experience, and I'll let you do that because it's absolutely fine. You're absolutely right with that. But again, there's nothing here really which contradicts the idea that drugs are beneficial, or certain drugs in certain sets and settings under certain circumstances are beneficial in assisting with that process.
You be yourself more, because we're very much distracted by the externals, right? There's nothing wrong with
That's true.
externals. They're needed for our life. But you've got to take that time to have that introspection and to just be with yourself and enjoy your own company, the actions and mechanics of your own brain. And in those times of calm and stillness, you can get an enormous amount of self-knowledge, particularly about your relationships. At one point, I was traveling through Belize, Guatemala, Mexico, with a woman. It was not a romantic relationship. She was a friend of a friend. And she went to go and visit some ruin that I'd already visited. And I climbed over the wall of a resort, and she was going to be gone for like 8 hours. And I spent 6 or 7 of those 8 hours sitting in a hammock, dozing a little, but I wasn't too tired, but just letting my mind wander, thinking about things, my life. Take that time. And through it, I came to the most extraordinary conclusions about a particular relationship that I then ended.
Hash smokers are greatly favored in this endeavor because you really need leather lungs.
Yeah, he's referring there to his relationship with his brother Hugh, who he talks about in other interviews as well, about how he had a very bad relationship with his brother, and eventually he defooed him, to use his terminology. Foo is F-O-O, family of origin. And he came to the decision after his hammock experience, which he's talked about before. So, yeah, again, I do recommend that too. I mean, sometimes I have come to interesting decisions, and I've come to interesting insights when I just go walk quietly in nature. Perhaps I don't do that enough, possibly. Although luckily I've got a job which allows me to do that for sometimes, which is good. But of course, it's not quite the same as just being out there and just sitting quietly in the great outdoors. So I know exactly what you mean, Stefan. I'm glad you found great insights using that method. But as I said before, the using of certain chemicals can assist you with that. It's not necessarily a substitute for that.
So, yeah, if peyote and ayahuasca and so on are so great, then why are the cultures so brutal and violent and deadly as a whole, right?
I referred to that earlier. Refer you to the answer I gave you before.
I mean, you say with Mexico, right? Say, all these criminal gangs and so on, and what's MS-13. Yeah, well, okay, but I think they're just kind of returning in some ways to the levels of violence that were around to some degree before the Europeans came. So,
Hash smokers are greatly favored in this endeavor because you really need leather lungs.
That's like saying that they basically, because the Romans ate this dream fish 2,000 years ago, that's why the mafia exists today in Italy. There's absolutely no connection between these two things. MS-13, they're a nasty gang of people traffickers and drug smugglers from Mexico. You get gangsters and things like that in many, many cultures. You have the Yakuza in Japan, the Triads in China. You get like the various groups and gangs here in Britain. Everywhere you get that. All these different places have different histories. So I've got to ask you, how is it that the emergence of a gangster, basically gangland violence in the modern world, is somehow connected to something that happened maybe in the case of ayahuasca many thousands of years ago, in the case of the city-states of the Americas, 1,500 to 2,000 years ago? How is one somehow a product of the other?
we shall see. All right. It's a long-running thing that some Western people look for mystical truths from foreign religions and foreign rituals. Yeah, that's just like the Beatles with their, Ravi Shankar stuff from India and so on.
Hash smokers are greatly favored in this endeavor because you really need leather lungs.
Yeah, this was old Mahesh Yogi. Now, this is he actually died a few years ago. Actually, he was basically developed the transcendental meditation, and the Beatles were really into that. And they used to spend a lot of time at his ashram, and his it's George in particular. I think he was the most passionate about this. George Harrison, he maintained this more than the others did. But you see, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with going to these places and exploring them and looking at what they have to do. People from all over the world have been there. And it has a great influence. I mean, for example, the ideas of people like the yogis of India have had influences across the world. I mean, and the Buddha as well. Buddhism is now very, very popular across the world. There's very famous Buddhists, who've been to there's a famous temple in India where the Buddha preached his first sermon, and Richard Gere has been there, Tina Turner, Koo Stark. These are people who are modern Western Buddhists. And you have to look out for cults. You have to be wary of cults. There's a really good film actually. It's called Holy Smoke. It's got Kate Winslet, Harvey Keitel in it. It's an Australian film, and I really shouldn't like it because it's feminist propaganda, but I do. I think it's funny and it's quite interesting. It's quirky and it's quite amusing. Also, Kate Winslet does a nude scene as well, and that's a sight for the old peepers. But leaving that out, which indeed they do if they show the film before a certain time. It's funny, it's witty. It has despite the fact it's feminist propaganda, it has a genuine sort of sophistication and cleverness about it, which I do like. But it's about a young woman who basically gets sucked into a cult in India, and she says she's leaving her family, she's never coming back, and things like that. And her family have to rescue her. And Harvey Keitel plays this deprogrammer, and it's really funny because she kind of turns the tables on him. It's hilarious. It's a really, really good sort of like two-hander, just two characters hashing it out with each other. Let Stefan continue anyway.
Oh yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy, and of course it is. It's very much encouraged by people who don't want good things for us, right? They want to encourage people to say, "Oh, well, the exotic and the foreign is somehow superior," and then you end up looking at your own culture as inferior, right? Oh, the mystical truths in the Indian culture, and the mystical truths from peyote and ayahuasca, and the mystical truths of the natives who were at one with nature. And I think there was a Jewish guy in that commercial where the supposedly Indian guy was crying. It was actually a Jewish guy. But so they will have you believe that somehow everything which is enormously dissimilar from or opposite to your own culture is deep and wise and powerful and peaceful and all of this Pocahontas shit. And no, it's the West is the best, and the Greco-Christian culture has done by far the most and most powerful good to the human world. I mean,
Hash smokers are greatly favored in this endeavor because you really need leather lungs.
Now that bit's one of the most interesting parts of Steph's entire program here, because he's partly right. I mean, firstly, he says, West is best, Greco-Roman, etc., derived civilization, Christian civilization derived. But as we've just learned, that our own culture in the pre-Illuminati era had the very, very same background as many of these other cultures, which he calls Pocahontas shit. It's the only difference is I think the Illuminati arose probably like about 1.5 millennia in the West before it basically went over and took over the Americas. But apart from that, they both have the same background with the same substance, the same use of chemicals which alter the consciousness. But he's partly right here, because firstly, I don't think there's any harm in learning from the wisdom of other cultures. It's an interesting thing to do, and indeed, one of the opportunities the British Empire gave was for us to do that as Britons. I know, again, the wokists say the British Empire was evil. It was all about slavery. Well, it wasn't. You see, it was both good and bad. It had good and bad aspects, like most things in the world. And see, I've never heard actually this idea that somehow that cultural Marxism is involved in this idea that, oh, your Western culture is so barbaric and it's ancient wisdoms and mystical Indians and rainforest people and things like that who are in one with nature. I haven't actually seen that. As I don't really believe that's a part of cultural Marxism, as Stefan was obviously referring to then. I think he's speculating a bit that maybe there is an element to that in propaganda. I've not seen it myself. What I have seen instead, in terms of cultural Marxist propaganda, they don't sort of say things like, oh, if you go to India, you'll find out what real civilization is, and it's so superior. They don't do that. What they just say is, Western civilization is built on slavery. All the streets in your town are named after slave owners, and things like that. That's the propaganda. That's where they break down your self-esteem. That's where they tell you your own culture is evil and your own race is evil. That is definitely the case. And Stefan talks a lot about that, and he does so correctly. I've not heard this idea that, going to the Maharishi yoga, like the Beatles did, that's a part of the same thing. I've not heard that. I don't think if you go to one of these yogis in India, they don't tell you things like that. They don't. I know people who've been to these places and have studied meditation with the Maharishi and other people. They don't sort of say, along with this enlightenment that I give you, I'm here to tell you that your country is evil, and you must denounce your country. You must denounce your own culture because it's all about slavery. They don't do that. I don't think I've never heard of anyone being taught that in these places. Bearing in mind, I've never been there myself, but I've never heard that myself. The people who get involved with this kind of meditation and stuff like that from India and go there, they don't come back as purple-haired, self-hating white people. They generally don't. The purple-haired, self-hating white people tend to be sort of materialistic atheists who've been to university and have had their head filled with the kind of nonsense that both Stefan and I have talked about before, about how, evil white people, things like that. So I've not seen any evidence to suggest that what he is. I mean, as for Pocahontas, he mentions Pocahontas. There's of course a famous Disney cartoon about Pocahontas, which is supposedly a part of this propaganda. I've not actually. I watched it years and years ago. It's about the true story of an explorer who lands in Virginia, one of the early English explorers, who makes friends with a young girl, and she's younger in real life than she was in the film because she's like a young woman in the film, but in the cartoon. But in real life, she was like about 8 years old, and she eventually goes back to England, and she actually died in Gravesend. Her grave apparently is in one of the churches. But this is sometimes called. Some people describe this as propaganda. I don't know. I haven't really looked into that myself. I think I may not have been conspiratorially aware when I watched that film. It was a long time ago because my daughter was very young when I watched it with her. So maybe someone who's watched the film more recently could tell me. All right, here we go.
Science is one of the reasons we have this conversation, this modern world, right? And
science created by logic was invented by Aristotle, who was ancient Greek. He'd probably been knocking back the Kylion when he was inventing logic and reason and science and all these other things, Steffi. Have you thought about that?
1850 BC to 1950 AD, 98% of all scientific advancements came from Europeans and European culture. Just a fact. 97%. And it's tough, if you're...
Well, actually, I should say that some of the inventions of, say, the Industrial Revolution were present in places like China at around the same time, but were never developed. It was probably something cultural, maybe with the West, that allowed people to develop that, and maybe, who knows. But, basically what he's saying is essentially true in most cases. Maybe he's wrong about the 90-something percent. It may be closer to 70 or 80%, but again, that's not really relevant to the subject matter we're talking about here.
Other cultures, it's tough to look at that record and say, well, we did have bride burning, so we do have a caste system, so,
That's India. He's talking about bride burning. The caste system is just basically a structured social hierarchy, which, of course, does exist in the West. I mean, we have like different classes and things like that, socioeconomic classes. But in India, it's very, very tightly controlled. It's really written into law. A bride burning, and that's sati, which is where they, in some parts of India, I don't know if it's sort of universal throughout India, but there used to be a tradition that when they cremate you in India, see, on a big funeral pyre, that the wife of the man has to sit and be burned alive on the pyre with her husband. that was, I don't think that exists anymore. And yeah, maybe, I don't know if it was stamped out, good. I mean, whoever did it, whether it was the British Empire or another Indian authority, good. But again, that's not relevant to the taking of some substance in a forest glade in the Amazon.
And yeah, there's truth and there's wisdom in just about every culture. There's important things to learn. But this fetishization, oh, that's a weird fetishization of other cultures is it's a subliminal attack upon your culture.
Again, I don't think. Well, I repeat what I said earlier. I'm not sure that's the case. The attacks on our own culture are far from subliminal. They are in your face. I mean, they literally say, things like, imagine a world without white people and things like that. And they say it casually, these wokers, without even considering, the awful implications of what they're suggesting. That I think is bordering on incitement to genocide. It's not subliminal. They say it quite openly. They say things like, ban all white people from this, ban men from this area, put a curfew. I mean, I talked about this in my Sarah Everard video. Let's have a curfew for all white men. That's not subliminal, is it, Stefan? That's loud enough for us all to see and hear and understand completely.
Like in Frozen 2, right? The sort of European culture was brutal towards the native culture, right? It's just communists doing the communist thing.
Hash smokers are greatly favored in this endeavor because you really need leather lungs.
Right, I've not actually seen that film. Disney. If it's a recent film by Disney, then I can well imagine it is probably quite in your face. I mean, Frozen 2 I've not seen. I'll have to watch it. I'm not sure I can be bothered. Disney's gone downhill big time. Really, really has in recent. I mean, the only Disney films I've seen actually in the last few years were the Star Wars movies, which I have reviewed on this channel, and they are bloody awful. They're bloody awful. Anyway, we're nearly at the end now, but I'll carry on.
Which is to promote the opposite of what you grew up in as better than you. The opposite of what you grew up in is just better, it's wiser, it's deeper, it's got more truths. And, by the way, can we just mention something about Paul McCartney?
Hash smokers are greatly favored in this endeavor because you really need leather lungs.
Okay, and that is the end of the relevant section of Stefan's video and radio. He's an audio version as well on freedomain.com. So he ends with changing the subject onto Paul McCartney, or to give him his proper name, Sir William Shepherd. He goes on, I don't know what he goes on. He basically goes off onto another topic, although he does have some kind of segue, but it's not worth exploring. But basically, Stefan Molyneux, again, he seems to be a man who is... I find him enthralling. I find his insights absolutely invaluable in some cases. I mean, I listen to nearly all his shows. I mean, I do skip a few. Some of them I just think are not relevant, and others I just think I would suggest are probably... he does a lot of stuff on feminism I kind of skip over now because it's kind of old hat now. And it would probably just annoy me. You've got to manage your exposure to horrors, as he himself says. So I don't watch every single one of his videos, but I do watch a lot of his videos since he's been banned from YouTube, of course, which is appalling. I think I actually mentioned that in one of I did a video about banning, and I did a video saying I made a video last year or the year before called Stefan Molyneux Almost Banned, but now he has actually been banned from YouTube along with a lot of other really interesting people. But of course you can find him on BitChute and Odyssey and all these other places, yes, including me. Yeah, you'll find me on all these other places as well. I don't know how much longer I've got on YouTube. But of course, like everybody, he's not perfect. Like everybody, he says things I think are incorrect. And he never hesitates for a second to point out the mistakes of other people. If he thinks someone's gone off the wrong track, he says so. He says it immediately. And you know what? He's got absolutely no reason to object if other people return the favour. And, I don't think he does. He actually said in there, if you think I'm wrong, just explain why. And then that's what I've done. So I think my guess is that Stefan will probably appreciate this video if he ever... I know he's watched at least one of my videos. I know because as replies to him, because I've heard him repeat little catchphrases that I use. So he is watching me. So Stefan, if you're watching, mate, thank you very much for this grist for my mill. I do appreciate that. I think you basically are a logical, ethical person, but you just have not really explored this subject in enough detail. I do recommend Graham Hancock's Supernatural, The Conquest of New Spain by Bernal Diaz, and DMT, The Spirit Molecule by Rick Strassman. And there's many others as well. There's loads of YouTube videos you can watch on this as well. Michael Wood, the historian Michael Wood, very, very interesting chap indeed. I mentioned his series Legacy and his series Conquistadors. I very much recommend. There's who else did I mention? Richard Rudgley. Richard Rudgley's not really relevant to Stefan's point. He's more kind of like a disagreeer of Graham Hancock, but do check. He does. Rudgley actually does a lot of like the Stone Age, like archaeology, paleontology, Stone Age stuff, which is very interesting indeed. Which proves actually very much that our ancient ancestors, even going back into prehistory, are really not that much different to us. They really were not that much different. But basically, this is me, Ben, your old needle in your little conscience. Looking forward to a time when you make another video, which I'll have to watch and apply to. And you never know, Stefan. You may have made it already, and I haven't watched it yet. In which case, I will. As for the rest of you, thank you very much for watching Hapanwo TV. There's be a reply video coming soon, I think, probably next, because I'm trying to try and do them every 3 weeks or so is probably a good time. Well, there may be another video in between, but I will be back shortly. Keep your eye on this channel, like, share, subscribe, hit that bell, etc., etc., etc. Thank you all of you for watching Hapanwo TV yet again. Hospital Port as pride and dignity stop the New World Order.